wrench. You're kidding me.
Wrenching it up, gonna wrench it up.
Welcome to Saturday's Wrench.
Hey, and welcome back to another edition of Saturday's Wrench. I wanted to make this special episode dedicated to the reconditioning process I followed to bring my aluminum parts up to a mirror finish.
Now, what you're going to need for this is some sandpaper. It comes in sheets like this. You want to rip it into sheets like this. You're going to need a 220 grit, a 400 grit, a 600 grit, and an 800 grit, wet or dry sandpaper. 3M worked the best for me. I found it to be the best quality. Don't cheap out on this stuff. You'll end up using way more than you have to, and it's just no good. You're also going to need a degreaser. I chose Super Clean. There's lots of different kinds out there, like Simple Green, etc., etc. But you're going to need a degreaser, a wire brush, 3 different buffing compounds. Your black, your brown, and your white compound. You're also going to need 1 buffing wheel per compound. This Sisal wheel with the black compound is a spiral rope wheel. It's a lot more coarse than the other wheels. You're going to need a cotton sewn wheel for the brown compound, and you're going to need a second cotton sewn wheel for the white compound. This is very important. Definitely want to use 1 wheel per compound. You're also going to need a bucket and some water. For the first part, you want to take your engine degreaser and you want to soak your parts in that. I soaked my parts for a couple hours. You don't have to do that. It depends on how greasy they are. But you're going to take the degreaser and scrub these parts really well. You want to get all the dirt and crud off these parts. I've already gone ahead and done this. So you want to scrub the parts really well with the wire brush and then rinse them in water really well and then scrub them with soap and water in a sink or in a clean bucket of clean water. Now I've already gone ahead and done that. Now my part is ready to be sanded. You have all your tools. You're also going to need some safety goggles and a breathing mask. And after the sanding phase, I'll be ready for the buffing phase. Okay, I'm ready to start sanding, and I'm going to wear my breather mask so no dust gets in my face.
So here I go with the 220 grit wet or dry sandpaper. As you can see, I'm trying my best to move in one direction. It's pretty hard to move in one direction on some of the smaller pieces of the part, but do your best. For instance, you can see that this particular part has a small ridge around the outside. Try your best to stick in one direction with the 220 grit sandpaper, and then when you go up to the 400 grit, move in a different direction to minimize the groove lines. Here you can see how fast it starts to clean up. I've probably only been working on this part for approximately 5 minutes, and already it's starting to look a whole lot better. At this point, you'll begin to notice which areas require more work than others, represented by the darker spots you'll see on the part. I'll take more care to pay attention to those particular areas until I'm satisfied with the result. You'll notice me switching out sandpaper for a fresh sheet. This is at your discretion. As you use the sandpaper, you'll notice parts of the paper that'll start to diminish or become smooth. Try to be as conservative as possible and use as much of one piece of sandpaper as you can. I should also note that the 220 will be the most useful when trying to sand out any major scratches or gouges in the metal. Take the time to really sand them down with a really rough sandpaper. You'll notice here that I fold the paper in half. I do this in tighter spots for better grip. Sometimes you may notice that you need to fold the sandpaper in a special way in order to reach the little nooks and crannies of the part. Here you'll notice the small nooks and crannies I was talking about where you bolt the part onto the motorcycle. These can be a little time consuming to clean, but be patient, don't give up. While you're doing this, just think about that brilliant shine and how it's going to look on your bike. You can see now that this part is really starting to transform. Notice the chip on the side of the oil filter cover. It looks like someone got impatient while trying to pry it off and used the screwdriver to force it. Son of a bitch. As you can see, the smaller areas of this part still need a bit of work. These sections are proving to be quite tough, but I'm going to keep at it. It's going to take some elbow grease, but I need to smooth out those little black areas so that I can see into the metal a little bit more. Going back to the chip in the oil filter cover, many people would simply replace this part or buy a new one. Instead, I have decided to keep this on my bike for a couple reasons. One, it gives the bike some character. And two, it serves as a major reminder to me that when I'm working on the bike, it is important to remember to take my time, relax, and do the job right. Show some poise and patience, and get the job done properly. You can see that this oil filter cover has come along quite nicely, and I'm almost ready to move on to the 400 grit. I will say that the first stage of sanding definitely takes the longest out of all of them. So ease your mind going forward knowing that the next phase will take a lot less time than the previous. Make sure you dip the sandpaper and the part you're cleaning into the water often. You don't want it to dry up. Once you notice that the black spots are all gone and the metal is looking smooth and clean, ditch the 220 and move on to the 400 grit. Now that I'm moving on with the 400, I'll turn the part 90 degrees and start mostly sanding in that direction. This will cut into the previous marks I made with the 220 grit and lessen the amount of groove marks in the metal. During the process with the 400, you'll really see the metal starting to shine up nicely. Take special care to really get into the small areas of the part and take special note of any trouble areas. As you can see, the metal's starting to look quite nice here. It's come a long way from when I first started, and I still have 2 more stages to complete. I am now going to move on to the 600 grit. See, I told you it starts to go faster and faster as you move up through the stages. This is because you have less trouble areas to work out. Again, make sure you note the direction you went with the previous sandpaper. Turn the part 90 degrees and start sanding in that direction. This may be difficult at times, especially when you have a bigger part with small little crevices, but do your best. Going back to what I said about being patient and doing things properly, I'm currently reading a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I'm really enjoying this book quite a lot and would recommend it to anyone interested in motorcycles. If anything, this book may teach you that motorcycle maintenance or sanding motorcycle parts all night may be a dull and tedious drudgery or an enjoyable and pleasurable pastime. It all depends on attitude. So approach this stuff with a smile. Think about how much you'll enjoy riding the motorcycle when you're finished, and how all the love you're putting into it will pay off in dividends. You can really hear that I'm out of breath at this point, but look how nice this oil filter is coming up. The metal has become really smooth and is looking quite nice. I think I'm ready to move on to the last and final sanding stage with the 800 grit sandpaper. Again, take notice of the direction you were working in before and be sure to turn the part 90 degrees and sand in that direction. Now the 800 shouldn't take you very long at all. You'll really see this part start to shine very quickly. Take care in smoothing out every little section of the part, and sooner or later you'll be finished.
Now we've gone all the way up to 800. A little out of breath. It took about 40 minutes. So you can see the result. I'm trying to get it really close. You can see the scratch lines are really fine. When I hit that with the black compound and the sisal wheel, it's gonna buff it right out. So that's after 800. I'll move on to the buffing process now.
Now it's time to start buffing these parts. Make sure you have some nice microfiber cloths in short reach or something specifically used to buff metal or car surfaces. You want to start with the black emery compound and the sisal wheel. Make sure your buffing machine or bench grinder is secured properly and then start the process. I found that wearing a breathing mask, hand and eye protection, and a good workshop apron really made this process go smoothly. There's going to be a lot of particles floating around in the air, so make sure you're not breathing too much of that stuff in. Start by applying the buffing compound to the wheel. You want to touch the wheel with the buffing compound for a second or two. Then move the metal up against the rotation of the buffing wheel. This is going to give you the best cutting action in your metal. You will notice that sometimes I go side to side with the part. This is just to make sure I'm getting everything evenly. This is something that worked for me personally, but but you may come up with another method. Here you can see I've buffed out only half of the part to show you a comparison between the sanding stage and the buffing stage. Continue with the black compound, reapplying it to the wheel in small amounts but often. Take special care to get into those small nooks and crannies just as before. You may have to hold the part in different angles to get into those small places. This process becomes a little more difficult as the size of the part you are trying to buff increases. My advice for this is just to do your best. Unless you have a Dremel tool with a small tool bit specifically designed for such an application. If you do happen to have a Dremel, I would recommend getting it out for such a job. I had a bit of a difficult time with the larger parts. Trying to get into the tight spaces really took a little bit of time, probably more than was necessary. But I was a man on a mission. I had to get these parts shined up, bud. While buffing with the black compound and the sisal wheel, it is important while in this phase to work on the major deformities in the metal. Just like with the lowest grit of sandpaper, you're going to get the most cutting action with this coarse sisal wheel and black emery compound. If you have any major scratches, take the time to smooth them out as evenly as possible. Don't just concentrate the wheel over the scratch. Instead, try to widen the area where you buff in order to create a more smoother and gradual area of repair. If you only buff in one spot, you'll cut into the metal quite significantly in that one area, and your part will become uneven. You may even run the risk of burning right through the part in the thinner areas. Really pay attention for the gradual smoothing of the metal, and keep working with the buffing wheel and the compound until the metal has become quite smooth and shiny. Times will vary, but feel it out. Again, try to turn the part every so often so as not to stick in one direction with the buffing compound and wheel. In my experience, I found that if you work in 90-degree increments, I got the best results. Go over every single millimeter of the part in fine detail. Look at the trouble areas and hit the wheel again to clean them up. You'll notice that the more you work with it, the smoother it'll become. You might even notice some lines in the metal from the buffing wheel. Again, just take the part, turn it 90 degrees and go through the part again and keep going until those little lines start to disappear a little bit. Once you're satisfied with the smoothness of the metal and the look, take the microfiber cloth and give it a good cleaning. The compound's going to leave a residue on the part and you really want to clean that stuff off. This is when you'll start to notice how extra shiny this part is starting to become. It has completely transformed into something that looks brand new. This process was incredibly fun for me, but like I've said before, it'll take you a lot of time. I'm going to rub all that excess compound off and you'll see your shine. So I'm pretty happy with this. I'm going to move on to the next phase with the brown compound. Now it's time to change out your sisal wheel for a softer wheel called a cotton spiral sewn wheel. With this wheel, I'm going to use the brown compound. This compound is like a pre-polish before you add your final glimmer, the white compound. In my research, I found that many people go from the black compound straight to the white compound, which I'm sure is totally fine, but this is a process I researched and one that I decided to stick with. With this cotton spiral sewn wheel, you can use a little lighter pressure than with the sisal wheel. This particular compound won't cut into your metal at all. It is just for coloring purposes and will help give the part that extra bling quality. You want to move your part into the wheel instead of against the grain like last time. This will give you the best coloring action for your part. Make sure you're careful to cover every single millimeter of the part. You don't want to leave any sections out. You'll begin to notice how incredibly shiny the part is starting to become now. You're rounding third at this point, so just keep it up a little longer. Just as with the black compound, this will leave a residue on your part when you're finished buffing. Wipe clean to reveal that miraculous shine and check the part closely for any areas you may have missed. At this point for me, I used the metal polish called Autosol to clean and polish my part before I went on with the final white compound. I found that this really cleaned the remaining residue off the part from the previous compound. You want to use a tiny bit of this and work it into the metal with the cloth. Once it's covered, use a different section of the cloth to clean it from the part. You'll notice a black residue coming off the part. Try and use as much of the cloth as possible and not rub any of that black soot all over your nice shiny part.
And I'm going to clean up inside these little screw holes just because they have all that compound in there, and I don't really want that mixing with my white compound, my last compound. So I'm going to change the wheel here and we'll get the last compound on.
Now it's time to move on to the final buffing compound. Make sure you get a fresh wheel for this. It is not recommended to use a wheel that already has a different buffing compound on it. So a fresh wheel is the best for a new compound.
New gloves.
If you're meticulous like me, get yourself a new set of gloves for the final process. The compound will build up on the fingertips of the gloves you used. So I thought it would yield better results if I used a nice clean pair of gloves with the next compound. This may be unnecessary, but it worked out well for me. Using the last buffing compound was my favorite. It gives off an amazing aroma in the garage. As before, move the part with the wheel direction for best coloring results. Take your time to cover every section of the part as thoroughly as possible. Enjoy the process because you're almost done. Trust me when I say that you'll be slightly disappointed when you're finished. Not with the results you've achieved, but with the fact that it's over with. I really did enjoy working on these parts. Putting in the time and effort was incredibly rewarding for me. I actually do have a lot of buffing compound left, so I may just hang on to it for future projects. You may have also noticed me touching the wheel with a saw. I do this to clean the wheel and fray out the cotton once in a while. You can actually buy a tool called a rake, and this is specifically designed for this purpose, but I found the saw does the trick quite well, and I already had one of these in the garage. You may also notice that small black spots appear on the part as you're buffing in this stage. It is my assumption that this is compound that is building up on your part. You can take the time to clean them off with a microfiber cloth, or use the saw and clean the wheel, and then reapply a small amount of compound to the wheel and continue buffing. If you keep getting these spots, add a little bit more compound to the wheel, and then apply the part to the wheel to help remove the spots.
White compound. She smells like car polish, that car wax smell. Just getting into the little crevices in the corners. And you can see it comes up pretty nice. There you have it. Beautifully shiny part taken all the way through the whole process. So now you can go out and do it on your own. Time consuming, that whole process probably took close to 2 hours just for that one part. So the bigger parts are obviously going to take you a lot longer, and you basically just gotta stick with it. Just gotta be patient. It's a time consuming process, but it's incredibly rewarding. You can see the before and after. I'll show you the before. There's the still of the before, and now this is the after. Before, after, before, after, before, after. It looks pretty fucking good to me. Nice mirror finish on the part. I'm pretty happy. So that's the whole process. And after this, you'll want to coat these parts with a product that seals this shine in. You don't want to expose this part to any water or put it back on the bike and go riding through the rain. It's going to severely stain the aluminum. At this stage, aluminum will oxidize very easily. It's been cut into. It's not susceptible to water. So you really have to either clear coat them, or there's products that will seal the shine in and basically just protect the part from any water. So look for those online, and I suggest strongly that you, at this stage, after the white compound, you're finished, I really would seal the part, and then you got a beautiful motorcycle part, and all your friends are going to be really jealous of your shiny motorcycle parts and your engine parts. And you can do this process to a lot of different kinds of metals, but this is how I achieved the beautiful shine on my motorcycle parts. So get out there and do some shining. And thanks for watching, guys. And until next time.